Joining us now is the incoming White House press secretary, Sean Spicer. Thanks for coming in.
You bet, Howie. Thanks for having me.
We'll get to John Lewis in a moment. We just saw you kick off that press conference with harsh criticism of CNN and BuzzFeed. The president-elect also adding his own inimitable language. That became the dominant storyline. Was that your plan?
No, it wasn't our plan. Our plan was to get out there and talk about the issues of the day, to talk about the remarkable and extraordinary steps that he is taking to focus on becoming president, on serving the American people, number one. But number two, to answer and respond to any of the other questions that the media had. It was unfortunate that that one reporter tried to be so rude and inappropriate and disrespectful, dominated. And again, I think, I said this after the event, and I agree with it now. I think he owes an apology not just to the president-elect, but also to Mara Liasson, who was the person that the president-elect had chosen to ask that question, or answer that question. He had called on her. She had respectfully put up her hand. He called on her. She is a veteran Washington journalist, well-respected. And the idea that he would shout her down because he felt that he deserved a question when another CNN reporter had gotten a question is just frankly disrespectful. I don't care. And look, this is something I would be arguing the same whether it was a Republican or Democrat, Barack Obama or Bill Clinton. You do not treat the president-elect or any major figure in that way. That's just, it's childish and disrespectful. All
right, but now you spoke afterwards to CNN's Jim Acosta.
I did.
And he said, and you've confirmed, that you told him that if he were to do something like that again, he'd be kicked out of the next press conference. And you've gotten
what Jim Acosta did, no, he went on and he lied about the events of that day. He was 100% false. He said I came up to him and, quote, during the press conference and told him if he asked a hard question, he would be removed. That's 100% not true. The cameras are on. We can actually view for people who had kept B-roll. The event had ended. The president-elect had gone up in the elevator. I walked over him, politely said to him, Jim, your behavior was unacceptable. That was highly disrespectful the way you spoke to the president-elect. He continued arguing with me. I said, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. Your behavior was disrespectful. He continued to argue with me. I said, Jim, I just want to be clear. If that happens again, I will have you removed. The same way that we'd remove a protester that was acting as disrespectful as he did.
You're referring to the interruption, not the content of the question.
The idea that he would go on television afterwards and answering tough questions. The president-elect took a lot of tough questions. We're going to take those tough questions. But the idea that he took no responsibility for his behavior was highly unacceptable and inappropriate. And he does owe us and his fellow members of the press corps an apology for his behavior.
But shouldn't you make a distinction, Costa aside, between BuzzFeed and CNN, which reported that Trump had been briefed on a synopsis of this unverified dossier, this Oppo document, but did not report any of the salacious details? How is that fake news?
Well, there's a couple things. One is CNN came out very strongly about events that occurred that were not true, how that went down. They somehow have sources. There were only 4 members of the intelligence community in that room. They claim that they had multiple sources. So either they were getting it directly from the director or they were getting it from people that were 1 off, 2 off, 3 off. That's hearsay. They didn't have it right. They were wrong when they began with. Then they posted a story, and then they mentioned the BuzzFeed story, gave it credibility. So they posted the story. Then BuzzFeed, because of the CNN story, posted their story with it all intact. Then CNN referenced the BuzzFeed story. It became this vicious circle where they sort of look at each other and say, it wasn't our fault that they did this, and then we reference them in our story, but we don't actually publish to them, but we create the appearance that you should go look at what's there. It's a pretty ridiculous argument to make that they didn't encourage people to go look at that.
All right. When Democratic Congressman John Lewis, hero of the civil rights movement, told Chuck Todd that he's not considered Donald Trump to be a legitimate president, won't be attending the inauguration because of Russian interference in the election, says Congressman Lewis. It's initially ignored by much of the media, but embraced by such MSNBC anchors as Lawrence O'Donnell and Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes and liberal sites like Slate. Your reaction?
Well, look, I think John Lewis is an icon in the civil and voting rights movement. He has spent years tirelessly advocating for people to be enfranchised and to vote. And so it's disappointing when someone who has worked so hard to talk about voting rights, to get people to participate in election, and to talk about the integrity of our voting systems, around after an election which Donald Trump won with 306 electoral votes, 33 of 50 states, 9 of 13 battleground states, 2,600 counties, and talk about the election being illegitimate. That undermines our voting system, and it's ironic and disappointing that somebody who is such an icon in the voting and civil rights movement would choose to use words like that.
But then part 2, Donald Trump goes on Twitter and says that Congressman Lewis should spend more time fixing and helping his district in Atlanta, and that he's all talk and no action. So, for example, New Yorker's Ryan Lizza said on Twitter, President-elect has started the Martin Luther King holiday weekend by attacking John Lewis, one of the great heroes of the civil rights era.
Well, Ryan Lizza might want to start with how this went down. Congressman Lewis, as you noted, went on Chuck Todd's show and said that the president was illegitimate. Somehow, no one seems to remember, the first inning and say this is what happened to start the game off. But it was John Lewis that attacked Donald Trump. Donald Trump has a right to respond to that, and he did, and forcefully. But we
can debate whether he responded too harshly.
Right, but that's beside the point. I think you see these reporters forget how the whole event started. It was John Lewis that chose to attack a president that was duly elected and seeks to question the legitimacy of the election that occurred on November 8th.
You confirmed to Esquire, which posted a story last night, saying there's serious consideration being given to moving the White House press corps out of the mansion. To moving the briefing. All right, let's clarify this. To another building.
Right.
There's been a lot of sharp reaction from journalists. And I know your argument is the briefing, it looks bigger on TV, is a small space.
Right.
You got a lot of more people who want to come to these briefings, whether you're briefing, whether the president-elect comes out to ask questions. But the idea of moving the core White House press corps out of that space, if that's being considered, that would take them away from whatever access they have to press officials and other officials, and would be the press would see that as a very hostile move.
Well, look, a couple things on that. Number one, the demand to cover Donald Trump, the excitement, the demand and interest is off the chart. And we saw that at that press conference at Trump Tower. 600 members of the media attended. We had thousands that sought credentials to get into the space. Right now, the briefing room in the White House fits 49 people. And I think that
a lot of people can stand there.
No, I understand, but fine. So let's say that you can get 70 people in there. And I know change is difficult sometimes, but I think sometimes change can actually be better. And what we're doing is looking at spaces in the White House that will allow more journalists to cover. And so I think sometimes change is scary, but change can be good.
But you say in the White House, not to another building.
No, but the White House is 18 acres. It's the old executive office building. It's the house itself. It's the new. But what's the downside?
Well, would this be temporary or permanent?
But let's try it for the first few weeks. Maybe it's we see what the demand is, see what the upsides. But I'm working with reporters, getting their insight. But the idea that you can involve more people, be more transparent, have more accessibility, should be seen as a welcome change. I think the idea that we can bring more people into this process, and maybe it turns out that after a few weeks we realize that we want to have a briefing in the briefing room. But this is about greater accessibility, more people in the process. There's a lot of talk radio and bloggers and people that can't fit in right now, maybe don't have a permanent seat because they're not part of the Washington elite media. But to allow them an opportunity to ask the press secretary or the president a question is a positive thing. It's more democratic and it should be welcome.
Sure, and we're short on time, but I want to ask you about last night's Saturday Night Live cold open. I mean, the president has made clear he's not a fan of Alec Baldwin, but this was a send-up of the briefing, and it actually used some of the sexual innuendo that no one is. Major news organizations are avoiding that was in that unverified report. What did you think of?
Look, Saturday Night Live used to be funny, and it's gone from being funny to just bad. Those aren't jokes. They're inappropriate. They turn off people, and I think for a lot of people, regardless of your political persuasion, that's not what you're tuning in for. It used to be funny and entertaining and lighthearted.
It's also a bit of a shot at Eric and Don Jr.
And it's over the top. And it's interesting that if someone had done this to the Obamas, there would be outrage and now it's sort of everyone laughs about on the left. It's not funny. It's inappropriate, and I think it shows that Saturday Night Live is going from being funny to just a left-wing, hit piece.
Sean Spicer, thanks very much for coming in this Sunday. We appreciate it.
You bet.